Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Vince is back for part 2 of an article we started discussing last week entitled, College List Building is Changing. Will that make college less equitable? And that's by Eric Hoover from the Chronicle. For a question from a listener, Emily from Pennsylvania has several questions about what resources are out there for families who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds but need help with the college coaching process. And for our interview, Marissa Salizar will be here for part 4 or 5 as we're talking about 6 different ways to visit a college and tour a college. And today we're focusing on the self-guided tour. And there'll be no college spotlight, but they will resume in 2024. Friends, if you never heard the first part of Vince and I discussing Eric Hoover's article, College List Building is Changing, will that make college less equitable? We encourage you to go back and hear the first half, but we will now resume with the final part. Student search was the one thing that really gave you access to pretty much everybody college bound. However, it worked so much better in an era when almost everybody was submitting the test score. Basically, the way it works is colleges pay for names. And it's a little more than 50 cents, and not much more than that, but it goes up every year. I remember when we first started doing the podcast, if I remember correctly, Vince, it was 38 cents when we started. I remember it went to 43,
Wow.
And I know people think, well, what's 50 cents? Well, hey, there's schools that buy 500,000 names.
Yes.
start working their funnel from that, right? Like that's one way that you can pretty much identify everybody who's looking at going to college, especially when you realize that schools can buy lists from the AP. They can buy, any AP exam you sign up for, the SAT, all the different administrations, the PSAT. And remember now the PSAT keeps moving earlier back with the 8-9 and the different variations of it. And then ACT as well, right? So that's really how schools got their initial database. And then they would use all their strategy to work the funnel. And once I said, I'm going to repeat all the content we had in those episodes, especially the first 2 where we did deeper dives on what are all the variables that schools can use when they're doing a search, because they don't just willy-nilly come in and say, I'm doing a search, right? Like they have let's say you're working with College Board or ACT, it doesn't matter. You're assigned a consultant who does an assessment of your needs, and then you put together a campaign.
Yeah.
And you figure out, okay. Yeah. I said maybe a month or 2 ago, Rick Shaw did a presentation for this when I went through a week of training at Harvard, and he's one of the instructors on the faculty there for the college admissions training for a week. And he did a presentation on this. And he's like, hey, our entire list buys humanities because we get enough kids banging the door down for things like engineering and finance and comp sci and STEM. So schools can micro-target by a lot of things. And then, they can have incentives and I think goals to try to get you to campus or tease out scholarships. But what happens when that goes away? Because the last 3 years, 56, 54, 52% of people have taken the test. Been more non-submitters than submitters 3 years going. And this, Vince, the numbers are even higher in California since, because of test blind being there.
Yes.
Right? And so that's just really decreased interest in the test. So what do you do? Well, one of the things that's happened is other middlemen have stepped into the game, and the article talks about EAB with. Sometimes I think EAB is the wealthiest educational company out here. I mean, they made one purchase for close to $90 million.
Wow.
And that was a while ago. Like, they just drop money like crazy. Anytime I hear that somebody went to EAB, I usually say something like, "I bet you like that pay raise." I say the same thing for the College Board too, by the way. you know, and the time the College Board, I said that time, I'm not going to mention who it was, but I said that to somebody recently, like, yeah, they pay really nicely over there. I get it. They just kind of gave me that little evil eye, but yeah, these people can pay well because they're money machines. And so they've gotten into the mix. College Vine is coming up with their own program. Niche, people should do a YouTube search on the CEO of Niche. He's got several great interviews where he reveals the business model, and how much colleges are willing to pay to get access. Students just think they're going on and they're filling information out. Like, they're selling that data to schools that they're capturing. And so a lot of these people have jumped into the role of the middleman. Now, I'm of two thoughts on this. There's been a really, really loud voice coming out saying this is not fair because these middlemen that are buying lists of names, they're not concerned with access. They're more, almost by nature of what they do, steering kids or steering schools toward people that can pay if not full pay, they're high pay. And so part of me feels like that's a valid point and it should be addressed. And I'm glad to see an article like this addressing it. The other part of me, I was listening to Akil Bello the other day talking, and he's making a really good point about the digital SAT. He's like, yeah, it makes sense for the school to go digital, for the SAT to go digital for a lot of reasons. But he said, be very mindful of test prep companies telling you that schools have to have the test because they profit off of people doing prep. So his point was, be very mindful, or be very cognizant. Anytime a test prep company tells you, oh, this school says it's test optional, but it's really not, because they profit from that industry. And that's the other part of me. Like, a lot of this article is the College Board screaming out because they're losing tens of millions of dollars now that so many less students are taking the test. And there's a lot of research to show that there's more test optional applicants in Black and brown communities. So, that point about access. And so they're screaming out about it, but are they doing it because they genuinely care? Or are they doing it because they've been hit hard in the pocketbook? Because what they're attempting to do is direct everybody to Big Future, and to use Big Future, which is run by the College Board, to, in effect, be a proxy for the old college list building and to capture names that way. So I really see both sides of the story. What are your thoughts? What side do you come down, Vince, on that? Or not necessarily there's a side, but any thoughts about anything I said?
Yeah, I think you did a really great job, sussing out sort of the detail, why these lists are important. Also, one thing that really stood out to me in what you were saying is that as less students opt into the system of testing, there are, hundreds of thousands of names that would have been there. And these big markets like California, if you've got the major provider of higher education in the state saying we're test blind, it's going to take a minute to convince students. And I probably, in my own work, because most of my students that I work with are in California, I have most of the discussions in 10th and 11th grade about testing. Should we try it? Should we access it? I do feel that it's important for students to get practice and experience before they make that decision, because I don't think they should just make it based on like a whim. So I encourage them to opt into that. And one of the reasons that I have encouraged students to, and one of the things I've noticed now, because the PSAT is digital, students have all this time to take the PSAT now. Like they have like 2 months to opt in to take the test because it's online. So I think that's a good thing because you're getting students in a more relaxed manner. The ones who are getting anxious about it, they can prepare to the extent they know what's about to happen. But knowing that you might not be a part of a list because you didn't opt into a system will help students make a good decision about preparing themselves. So they're making a good decision, one that's based on information rather than fear of what the experience will be like if they have to prep for an exam. So the way you sussed it out, I think, was great. But I see, I see, I do see an increase from the most selective schools that you had it in your podcast when Lee Coffin, he said we sussed out all these kids. We saw they had some test scores and they weren't submitting them and they were in this bandwidth. I almost fell out of my chair when I heard that podcast. So I think the information for the population that's probably listened to your podcast, they're well informed. But what's unfortunate is that if we're trying to increase the number of students going to college, I think this report is vital because there's a whole segment of students who are not getting information about colleges, like constant reminders. Like I have students who I'm always surprised by how much email, because usually they have like a separate Gmail from their, personal or school email, because it just, I don't even know like how these schools find them because they've never taken a test. I don't know how they get on these lists, but the number of email that's generated. But I will say that every year, 2 or 3 kids end up at a school they wouldn't have considered because their email campaign was successful and interesting.
Yeah. Now, if someone's listening and they're thinking, am I going to miss out on this because my student is not planning on taking the test? So there's a real simple solution for you. For a quick reminder, let's talk about the admission, what's oftentimes referred to as the admissions funnel.
Okay.
This is a recruitment funnel that every school does. They all have their funnel, and they may use a different, drip campaign or whatever to attack it. But it's going to start out with prospects, and prospects literally are anybody in the potential universe that could apply to your school. And then it goes from prospects to inquiry. And then it goes from inquiry to applicant, and it goes from applicant to admitted applicant, and admitted applicant to matriculant, meaning enrolled. And then hopefully you don't melt over the summer and you show up in the fall.
Okay.
Now, all the stuff we're talking about is at the prospect level. When you go from the biggest drop off in the funnel is prospects to inquiries.
Yep.
Because at the inquiry level, the student had to take some initiative. The prospect level, they just could be targeting your name because they can, they're going to target what they need, whatever their need is.
Right.
They can target by location. They can target by gender. They can target by major. They can target by self-reported GPA. They can retarget by test score bandwidth and other things as well. So in the past, they used to be able to target by race. Well, who knows what's going on with that? And I don't think anybody probably wants their fingerprints on that. But if you look at a school's buy, even the schools that buy huge numbers of names, 250,000 names, out of that 250,000 names, they might be happy to have 10% of that be inquiries.
Yeah.
So how does somebody become an inquiry? Well, certainly you become an inquiry if you do all the different things we've talked about, right? You show up at a fair, fill out the card, you're an inquiry. Visit the campus, you're an inquiry. Come to a school visit, you show up, you're an inquiry. But there's one simple way that you can be an inquiry, and that is to go onto the school's website and request information. And you already now are more valuable in some ways than just a bot name. Now, the nice thing about a bot name is, well, there's tons of things they can't see, like they can't see the transcript, and they can't see your recommendations, and they can't see extracurriculars, and they can't see your writing. They can at least know off of a test score and a GPA if initially you look like you might be in that admissible range.
Yeah.
Where with an inquiry, you could potentially be way outside of the admitted profile. But people that go on the inquiry list, they oftentimes go into a special mailing and a different targeting that happens than people that are just prospects. Because the fact that you took initiative indicates that you presumably have some interest in them. And so, you may be thinking, well, that sounds good, Stuck, but our family can't afford to go visit the schools I'm interested in. And these schools don't come to my school anyway. They only come to the rich kids' school around the corner. You might even say, I looked up the schools coming to the college fairs in our area, and there's some schools I'm really interested in, and they're not coming to the college fair.
Right.
So it sounds good in theory, but it doesn't help me. But here's what you're missing. One, you can just go on and fill out an inquiry form. No time. No money. Can do it from your desk. And the other thing that you can do is you can sign up for a virtual engagement for a virtual information session. All of that stuff is going to elevate you beyond just prospect status to inquiry status.
Yeah.
And so those of you who are listening, you're in the know. You have a perfect workaround. And that's one of the reasons why Brennan comes down on the position of he's anti-search. I'm more pro-search. Like I think you and Vince, we both tell our students to plug in, but he has good points. His points are, one, he feels like my kids are getting pimped, that their names are getting sold, and he doesn't like the fact that nobody even tells them about it. So you're pimping my kids without telling them about it. So he has a moral issue with it.
Okay.
But his other point is all you have to do is go on and complete an inquiry to the schools that you want to recruit you.
Right.
And then you won't get your email blown up with from a bunch of schools that you might not care about anyway. Rick counters with, do you know how many kids we have on our campus right now? That wouldn't be there if we didn't do a search campaign with targeted mail. They would have never heard of us. Or so they both have valid arguments. Brennan's point works better in a controlled environment with a really knowledgeable college counselor that can walk everybody through the process. But the point is, this should not adversely impact any of our listeners because you have a great workaround. Just skip the prospect stage and jump right to an inquiry.
Right.
Every school has a form. Every single school has a form on their admission site where you request information to get on the mailing list. And I don't know of a school, and I'm not saying there's not one because I don't know every school, but I don't know of a school that's not doing some type of virtual information sessions, virtual presentations in this digital age. And they literally had to with COVID that shut down their visits, right? So for our listeners, this should in no way, shape, or form be some type of albatross or some hindrance to them. But just as a FYI, knowing what's going on in the profession is a pretty big deal that search, which had been the lifeblood for 50 years, just got turned upside down when you no longer do have access to the entire, student body across the country.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It's search is handicapped, but it's crippled, but it's not dead. Because one, people still continue to take the SAT, the ACT, the PSAT, and anytime you take an AP or an ACT or PACT, so they still have ways. It's just not quite as comprehensive as it was before. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Vince?
No, it's better. And I'm glad you talked about, the funnel process.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone loves inquiry. First, student adds themselves to the list. They go to number one in terms of demonstrated interest. It's like,
yeah.
Everybody loves a student who opened the website, found the request information, and put themselves on the mailing list. So I always start there with every kid. Like, you're interested, put yourself on the list right now.
Do you feel, Vince, that in general, this is in general, because I realize there's a big difference between Whittier College and UCLA on something like this, but do you feel like in general, two things: schools don't communicate how much demonstrated interest ends up factoring into decisions, and also that the public at large, overall, certainly our listeners may be an exception or a large portion of them, overall, the average person doesn't realize how much interest can play a role in admissions decisions.
They don't realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel both of those things are true. Schools tend not to communicate it as lucidly and convincingly as oftentimes is true. And the public oftentimes doesn't realize. But it's a difficult conversation because, your friend Gary Clark at UCLA, he's not utilizing interest at UCLA the same way he did when he was at Pitzer.
No.
Very different, isn't it?
Right. And it's in his mind, it's a blessing. It's like, peace of mind. If they were counting how many people were banging on the door because they think it matters. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't miss that part of his job.
Sure. And it's a difficult thing for schools because, you're a mission officer, you want to be transparent. Let's say, you're at a school where demonstrated interest really matters. It's a pretty big factor. Some of them just throw it out there. They're completely candid. But you also run the risk, and especially at the most selective, of now somebody interprets that as, oh, I'm going to come to 3 information sessions at your school and take 3 tours instead of 1. I'm going to hit up my admission officer with an email every other week. Yeah. We're on video. You guys can't see this. And Vince is there saying, no, don't do that.
You're basically saying, I have no faith in my ability to get in. And so I'm going to blast you till I'm so annoying, you're going to admit me.
Well, I like to use the whole thing about dating, right? Like, dating works for a lot of these examples.
Yes.
It gets you in trouble, but it works. So yeah, so if you show no interest in somebody, they're probably going to drop you for someone that's showing some interest. But if you just absolutely smother them, they're likely to be repelled and not find that very winsome. Question for you: when you were at Pomona, did you? I know demonstrated interest wasn't as much a fact. I mean, it was absolutely a factor, but I think there wasn't as much knowledge of it in the applicant body. But did you experience people going overboard to try to, in a way that was not in their best interest because they thought I'm scoring interest points?
No, but I did, not from the applicant side,
Parents?
but not from the parent side, but I do remember even way back then, this is, the 90s.
Right.
There was a discussion about students and their interest in Pomona. And if they lived within 200 miles and they hadn't been to campus, goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye. I don't care. I don't care if you interviewed well.
Yeah.
Goodbye. And it was like a concrete discussion in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, after you heard that news, everyone was vote down. Boom. Bye.
Haven't showed up.
Right.
Yeah. And Haverford College has the same policy, by the way. Theirs is a 150-mile rule. I mean, one of their reps, he's not there now, but he used to be there, and he was really transparent. And he used to say, I'm going to tell you, if you live at 150 miles, you don't visit, you're not getting in. It's just that simple. You're not getting in.
Well, Jess used to work at Pomona.
Yeah.
He learned well.
That's true.
I know where he learned it.
I forgot to say that. So Jess Lord is the Dean of Admission at Haverford, and he was at Pomona back in the day. He used to visit us at Westtown as he was the Westtown rep. Yeah.
Well, that's where I met Susan.
You guys overlapped. You guys overlapped, I think. Didn't you a little bit or not?
We never overlapped, but that's where I met Susan. I visited her at Westtown.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's so cool.
I was a Mid-Atlantic rep for 2 years. I loved it.
Yeah, no. And so there might be somebody that's thinking, why? What does mileage have to do with anything? Do you want to just explain that, Vince?
Mileage? What do you mean? Oh,
Why would
mileage.
you have a 200? What's with the 200 miles or the 150 miles? Like, what's up with that?
It's interesting. I don't think people realize this, even if you live in LA. If you go from, the water, the ocean to Redlands, you're still in LA County.
Mm-hmm.
It is huge. That is a huge, that'll take you like 2 hours and 30 minutes, 2 hours, 45 minutes, depending on traffic to get across all that. So, because people talk about their life, at least in California, by freeway references, I take the 10 to the 405, the mileage makes a big difference. So, because it should be accessible, because they encourage students to look at the campus, um, they figure that if you have access, and almost, before there was a sense of, some people have more privileges than others, before that conversation really became sort of ever present, there was a discussion of, that everybody has a car. Now that's not so much true. And I would still argue there were people who lived in Pomona, which is, borders where the Claremont colleges are, and they've never heard of the Claremont colleges.
Sure.
So, but the distance was, it's accessible. You should be able to get there. And you can get to the Claremont colleges now by getting on like what is equivalent to the subway. So there really isn't an excuse to not get there.
Yeah. And from a school standpoint, I always like to say they're recruiting to enroll. They're not recruiting.
Yes.
They're not recruiting to let you know you met some proverbial standard of you're acceptable.
Right.
And so if you live close and you can't get there, it's an indication to a school that you're not that serious about us, and you're treating us like a backup. And as a school said to me in May, when Lisa and I were visiting some schools, you ghost us, we'll ghost you back. So,
wow, I love that. That's good.
Yeah. So, the thinking is you're not coming. Now, I think you have to be careful with that.
Yes.
One thing I really appreciate Matt Bonser bringing out in our interview about demonstrated interest,
mm-hmm.
about one thing he didn't like about the 150-mile rule and this, that, the other is you can be under-resourced. You can be in a family that doesn't have transportation. And, it's not always easy. I mean, I started a college fair working with Susan that ran for almost 20 years at Westtown. And the impetus with that was this kid from Chester, Pennsylvania, that couldn't get to Princeton, 65 miles away. Well, there was another kid that was on her third trip to California from PA. And it was like, wow, look at the disparities between people with resources and people without resources. Let's start a college fair and bring the colleges to the kids. Like, that's what was the impetus for that. And so I think it is important that schools are conscious and they have exceptions built in for under-resourced kids if they really want to be sensitive to social class. Would you agree with that, Vince, or not?
Yes, I do. And I think they are now. I think Pomona, I think, I don't know, a quarter of the student body at freshman admitted class, maybe lower, 21%, are Caucasian.
Well, one thing that's been encouraging to me to see is the growth in the first gen numbers and in the Pell numbers at some of the most selective schools in the country. And it's getting to the point now where if you are under 20%, Pell, you're kind of being shamed a little bit as, wow, you're not socioeconomically diverse. Half the country is going to be Pell with the new formula. And if you are sitting at 10, 12, 14, 16, 6, 8%, it's almost a little stigma on you. And you might have seen that article that really shamed Duke because their numbers they're like down around 12%, where like, the Yales and the Harvards and the Princetons and the Wash U's, those schools, Emory, all those schools are now 20 to 25.
Right.
And that's a new thing. That wasn't, that's happened since you and I have been doing this work. There never used to be I hate to use the word status, but stature maybe is a better word. There's almost stature now to a school saying that we have the full spectrum socioeconomically. And we're not just you know, homogeneous echo chamber and enclave.
Yeah, well, that's my commitment, my training around that came from my time at Pomona. We were already above 20% in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, Pomona's been a leader for a long time, and I know your old boss,
Yes.
Bruce Pock. He's had a commitment to this. I think that exceeds what a lot of admission directors have had, and our listeners are going to get a chance to hear from Bruce. He's made a commitment to come on. We just got to book him. You know, yeah, we just got to get him to get on here, but he's agreed to do it. It was just he doesn't pull punches. He'll be an interesting listen when he Vince.
He will. And now, he's at a school where it's a totally, new group of students that he has not, had a lot of access to or opportunity to work with. But he's loving it because they're so appreciative of the support he's able to give.
Well, there are not that many people around anymore that started in the 70s. He's one of the ones, right? 1977 Wesleyan.
Yeah,
So he's getting close to 50 years in the business, and I'd love it when we get those people on. We just sit at their feet and glean some pearls of wisdom from them.
yeah, but it's like an interview with a vampire. He looks 50.
He does.
He
He does.
does. He
He
looks
does.
50, and he's not that. I won't give an age, I promise.
Yeah, but he's got his energy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Vince, this has been great. As good as always. Love talking shop with you. Appreciate your friendship. Before we came on, I was just recounting that it's almost a year to the day to when I was on a 9-school fly-in program visit to California, and Vince treated me to an incredible breakfast, a big spread. And these people that we talked about were there, right? Bruce Bach was there. Gary Clark from UCLA was there.
Yes.
All at Vince's house, and we just reminisced and shot the breeze for a good couple hours. It's almost a year to the day when I was
Wow.
with you. So I know I thanked you for that before, but thanks again. That was a real highlight of my trip, and we got to figure out a way to get you east now, man.
Yeah, I got to come to the homestead. I got to sit in that room with your background of legends that inspire you every day, I'm sure.
Or get you to the SACAC conference, because a lot of us go there. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. So
okay.
we'll talk offline and see what we can do on that one.
I'd love to do a play-by-play right from there, live session.
Yeah, live Q&A. Awesome.
All right.
Well, thanks, my friend. Thanks for all your contributions, and look forward to you next month.
Happy holidays.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hi, Lynda. How are you?
Hey, Lisa. I'm doing well, thanks.
Well, I'm very excited to have you to help me answer this question from Emily from Pennsylvania. Let's roll the tape.
Hello, your college-bound kid podcast listening family. My name is Emily, and I'm calling in from Pennsylvania. As a parent from a low-income home, I've been thrilled to find your podcast. I've learned so much since I found you this past summer. Your team is providing a valuable resource for families who are trying their best to help their child get a great education in spite of their financial circumstances. So thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge. My question today is about students who are coming from low-income families. I know of several nonprofit organizations that focus on offering free college advising services to low-income students who fit a certain profile. Do you recommend using these services if your family cannot afford a college counselor? And are there any specific organizations that you would recommend over others, or for certain situations? Thank you.
So, as you can hear, Emily is asking about different programs that offer low-income students counseling for college, and if there's any recommendations we have or how to choose between them. So, Lynda, you've been working with one, and now you're starting to work with another program, if I'm correct in that. Tell me about your experiences.
Yeah, so this past year I worked with Matchlighters, and they provide counseling for students, and it's college counselors volunteer their time to work with students. So we typically, the Matchlighters program works with students beginning in about their second semester junior year or senior year students. I mean, they'll take you in your senior year or even gap year transfer students. And it's a terrific program. There are some requirements as far as you have to either qualify for free or reduced lunch, qualify for SAT or ACT fee waivers, be enrolled in a federal, state, or local program aiding students from low income families. And they also have an income table on their website, so you can kind of get an idea. One of the things that I like about them is they're looking for students to have at least a 3.0 GPA. So it's not necessarily students who are, coming in with perfect test scores or anything like that. And they're looking for U.S. residents. They are unable to work with international students right now, but they can work with undocumented students. In this program, you get at least 10 hours of counseling, one-on-one counseling from the counselors with the students, and they get access to all of the college essay guide resources. So Matchlighters is a part of a college essay guide, and it's been a terrific program. Highly recommend. The other program that I am not working with is a little bit different. It's called Matriculate, and they also offer free advising. They're looking for academically talented, low income high school students, and they look for students to have a 3.5 GPA out of a 4-point scale. So they've got a little bit higher academic requirements, test scores in the 90th percentile. Although if you don't have test scores, they have a test optional way to come in. And their income levels needs to be less than $90,000. So there is some differences there. The main difference with the program Matriculate is the counseling is done by near peers. And that means current undergrad students are actually doing the counseling. And I know that can sound a little frightening, but they go through a lot of training and they get 15 hours of training before they're matched with a student and then additional training on top of that. And they go through background checks, they apply, they interview. So it is rigorous, but it's near peer. There's good things and bad things about that. I like the idea they're better able to communicate with students kind of on their level and not giving them, my Gen X lingo that no one seems to appreciate.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I think you're gnarly.
I am so much. Yes.
See what I did there. Anyway, so the near peer thing has some positive aspects to it, but obviously, even with the training, it is different than working with an experienced college counselor. Now, neither one of these programs has geographic limitations other than domestic students. But as far as, finding someone in your area, there are so many CBOs out there, community-based organizations that provide counseling services for students. And my recommendation would probably be to touch base with your high school counselor's office.
Yeah. Yeah. I have worked with two organizations so far, and one of them was such a local organization. It's based in Illinois. It's called College Bound Opportunities. And it is only 4, maybe 5 high schools in the northern Illinois suburbs participate in it. And you get recommended by your school to be part of it. And they're looking again for, a strong student. It's not necessarily like a 4.0 student, but a strong student. But the great thing about that program, which is why, this is why you kind of need to see what is available locally and nationally, is they give you 6 years of support. So they bring you in, not me, they bring the student in junior year. They give them ACT prep. They have a full-time college counselor on staff, and each student is assigned a mentor. And they get a scholarship. They get a free laptop, or it's not free, it's a scholarship laptop to take with them to college. And they get a scholarship throughout the 4 years, but they also have a mentor for 4 years, which helps with, graduation and persistence. So they are a very successful program, and I was really impressed by them, but I can't be a mentor anymore because I do not live in Illinois. So I have worked with a more national program called Scholar Match, and they are based out of California. I believe David Eggers is the one who initially got the funding to start this program. I do think they have some walk-in services in California, but they did have a national pool, and I believe they got names from when kids took the PSAT or PACT. They would get these names and they would offer them. When they would fill out that survey, they said, would you be interested in some free college counseling? And some savvy students that I worked with said, heck yeah. And so they got stuck with me. But I would say, I feel like those students had a pretty good, I treated them just like I would treat my other clients. Maybe, I didn't have to worry about counting hours or anything. So maybe more. They got more, because it's just we did whatever we needed to do. And one of the students I actually interviewed on the podcast, Bryn, and so if you're interested in that, go take a look and listen to Bryn's interview and her experience of Scholar Match. But one of the funny things about it was that she went to school in a rural school in Wyoming, and there was a kid who was there, I think originally from the Washington, D.C. area, but come for the last 2 years of high school, and he had a very high-priced college counselor. And he asked her how much her college counselor cost, and she said nothing. And he's like, well, she must be terrible then. But, she got into her first choice ED, and she's very happy. So I don't know. I feel like we did well for her. So it's been a really rewarding experience. I keep in touch with some of the students. I just had one of my students come back and say, I think I want to transfer. Will you help me? And so, of course, I am the worst capitalist in the world. And they said, sure, I'll help you. So, there are just a bunch of different flavors. Now, I know on the Common app, you can actually, I think, check if you're interested in working with someone. And I think that takes you to Strive. And Strive is another organization, I think, that they provide college counseling virtually. So, and then, here in North Carolina, there's a big emphasis on the College Advising Corps. Which is, I think, a federal program maybe, where it takes recently graduated college students, they train them, and then they embed them in high schools to work with the students there. And so that's another option. If your school participates in that, you might be able to get some help there. But really, I think that Emily and her students should just kind of ask at the school, look on the internet, maybe put in a couple of applications and see what feels like the best fit to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I just have to say what strikes me is the fact that you're thinking about this and you're listening to the podcast, you're already ahead,
right?
Just by asking the questions and doing the research. But yeah, I think that's good advice. Take a look at what's out there and avail yourself of what's available.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of the students that I have worked with, they're either first generation college students, and sometimes they're immigrants. So their parents' English might not be their first language. And, none of them have gone to college in the United States, and they have kind of just don't know where to start, understandably, with that process. So I wish Emily and her student the best of luck. We here at Your College Bound Kid are here for you, and we're going to be giving you 3 hours a week of information, as much as you can stand, every week, 52 weeks a year. So hopefully that can be of help to your student as well.
Agreed.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, so far in the series I'm doing with Marissa Salizar on different ways you can visit a college campus and what's involved in those visits, we covered a number of things, including open houses and admitted student visit programs, fly-in programs, and the traditional daily visit. Well, in part 4, we will turn our attention to the self-guided tour. Marissa tells us what the self-guided tour is. She talks about the different types of self-guided tours. She talks about when she recommends a self-guided tour. She talks about whether virtual or in-person impacts demonstrated interest. She talks about what a student can do to maximize the value of a self-guided tour. And finally, Marissa talks about whether a student should let an admission officer know if they just popped by and stopped on campus, but they didn't do an official registration. Listen and enjoy. I know this all appears as one continuous interview, but I have to especially thank Marissa because we're actually recording a second time. Because after we recorded the first time, we were like, hey, what about self-guided tours? Hey, what about virtual? And so that's what we're going to discuss today. And before you dive in on this, Marissa, I'm really interested in this because, of course, during the pandemic, and you know this as well as I do from that side of things, everything was like shut down, right? And so people were like freaking out. They couldn't get tours. Everything was closed. And it feels to me like, I mean, we're mostly back, of course, because, you know, no, COVID's not, I mean, someone would look at somebody like they're from Mars if they said we're not doing tours because of COVID now. Like, but it feels like it's still harder for people sometimes to get tours. I don't know if, like in some cases, I think some schools decided not to offer as many or to limit the size. I have more problems continuously with students saying they can't get a tour, and therefore I'm going to be on campus. I could do a self-guided tour. So first of all, does that ring true to you from your side of things?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely have seen a shift in talking to especially peer institutions to Colorado College of just folks limiting the number of students that can go on tour or prospective guests, how many times a week, like you mentioned, that they're offering these tours. Some colleges are completely eliminating weekend tours or open houses. So I have definitely seen that shift on this side of the house.
All right. So let's not assume that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. So why don't you tell the person who's brand new to this what the self-guided tour is? Why don't we just start with that?
So yeah, self-guided tours in and of itself, as the title would suggest, is the individual that is coming to campus, that's inquiring about this tour, will be the one leading themselves versus, you know, the traditional tour where you'll have an ambassador, an admission officer leading that tour. Typically, when you arrive to campus at an admission office building, how the model of a self-guided tour might work is that there will be a pamphlet or brochure outside of the building that, you know, families can collect. And that will take them on the campus tour and will have some highlights along the way that they can read and follow along. But of course, it's self-paced. They can choose to go on all of the tour. They can go bits and pieces. They can hit the highlights that they are most interested in. I've seen other colleges where, in addition to the brochure that leads them on the traditional campus tour, they also have QR codes embedded in the map in which they can arrive at, you know, stop number 1, scan the QR code, and that will pull up a video of an ambassador that will talk about that space or talk about that building. So I think COVID, if there was a silver lining, is this more sort of virtual platform or virtual friendliness of the QR codes, of the videos, and the virtual platforms for folks to be able to engage.
Have you seen this where like admission office gives parents and students or counselors, whoever's on tour, like a headset? And it like talks into the headset. Have you seen that? Because I know that's out there because I've had that. My family's talk about that. I've never experienced it personally, but I've heard that from families.
It's giving Disney.
Yeah.
No. I haven't myself encountered that, especially when I go on tours or talk with folks in the field. I haven't ever witnessed that. But when COVID first hit, that is definitely something that we toyed with, the idea of having families come to campus and giving them like sort of like headless or wireless headsets to go on tour with. But we ended up just doing that with our tour guides, and they had wireless headsets, gimbals, iPads, and they were able to do virtual tours that way. But I do love this idea of giving headsets and people can follow around like they're in a museum. That's kind of cool.
Hey, high tech. High tech.
Mm-hmm.
So then the
Yeah.
$1 million question is, when do you recommend a self-guided tour?
Earlier on in my session with you, Mark, I talk about the list, right? And like, where are schools at on your list? And so Colorado College, is amongst your top 1, 2, 3. And there's that financial and personal commitment that families can make do, I would say, to visit the campus. Really, if schools are further down on a student's list, I would say you can probably get away with the self-guided tour or the virtual tour if tours have filled up, because I know you just mentioned that earlier, of folks really limiting their sizes, limiting their offerings. So I would definitely say if you're not able to get in on a traditional campus tour, the next best thing is to come on campus and just be able to see the spaces in person, which also begs the question I think a lot of folks ask of virtual components. Like, is there a difference between whether I engage virtually or in person? And like I mentioned before, and I will continue to say, is we just care that you're carving out the time to come and see this, whether it's going to be self-guided or on a guided tour or virtually. The fact that you're getting to know us speaks volumes in the application process. And it's very evident when it comes to application reading as well.
Yeah, and when you say, is there a difference, you're talking about from a standpoint of like demonstrated interest, and does it impact
100%.
the read on your part? Yeah, that's how
Exactly.
you're
Yeah,
to
from
that.
an admission officer's
Sure,
view.
sure.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Comment on what you just said. I think that might be interesting to our listeners when you said it's really evident when you're reading. Can you comment on that?
I can, yeah. So I know you've done a segment on demonstrated interest before, and I think there's a few ways that unfolds in the reading process. The first is, of course, the obvious dashboard of, yes, they've come to campus, they've done a virtual tour, they've done an interview, so on and so forth. A lot of selective liberal arts schools have supplemental questions, and some of them will ask point blank, like, what's your favorite part about Colorado College? Or how can you see yourself fitting into our community? And a lot of times folks will use their experience, whether virtually or in person, to talk about what that was like to engage in our community. We can definitely tell when a student has been to campus or has done their research on our institution because they use specific examples in their supplements. And not all students will do that. But I think it's particularly evident when students come to campus and virtually engage with us that we're like, this is a well-written sub, and I'm liking the specifics in here. So I think that's how it can play out in our reading process.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
For our recommended resource for the week, I want to continue with Emily's question about resources for under-resourced families and tell you about a fantastic organization that I used to be very actively involved in. And the organization is called NPEA. Now, NPEA is just an acronym that stands for the National Partnership for Educational Access. The National Partnership for Educational Access. And the URL is just educational-access.org. And the reason I want to tell you about NPEA is what they do is they pull together a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations committed to lessening or decreasing the barriers between well-resourced and under-resourced families. And they have a list of all of their member organizations or their CBOs or community-based organizations that are helping provide counseling services for under-resourced families. So if you just go to education.org and then you go down and click under the membership, you can look up the Our Members, or you can go to the resource page and there's just incredible amounts of resources there. But obviously I worked for a CBO, community-based organization, for almost 14 years. So it's very an NPEA, going to conferences, and literally almost all of the major organizations in the country that provide free resources or greatly reduced resources for under-resourced families are members of NPEA. I'm sure there's some that are not, but all the major ones are. And so I know Lynda and Lisa talked about, like, check out your local area, and there's lots of resources besides the ones they discussed. I just want to give you a really good place where you can go and see a large number of resources, and then you'll have to do a little bit of research to see if they serve your location. but I'm very excited to share this with you. I've had a chance to present at their conferences before. I used to attend regularly. Our recommended resource for episode 389, NPEA, and the website, educational-access.org. Now return to my interview with Marissa Salizar. Thank you. I want to go back to something you said because it's really important. It's what I see on my end. I don't really see anybody, I can actually never remember a single time ever where somebody set out and their goal was to do the self-guided tour. Although I can think of one Connecticut family that was absolutely blown away. This is one that got the headset, by the way. This was last year. They're freshmen now.
Taking notes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were blown away by how amazing it was, and they looked forward to doing more of them. But I've never, ever had someone, my goal is to schedule a self-guided tour. But what happens in reality is what you said is that tours fill up. And you may or may not see that as much because there's not a lot in Colorado Springs as far as colleges. So you're oftentimes the destination visit when people come.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure, obviously, you're not the only school there, but you're primarily that's what's happening, right? So, but for people that are going to really popular places like Boston and New York and LA and Atlanta and Philadelphia and the Bay Area, they oftentimes pick those places because, I can see 3 schools at once. Like we only have limited time. It's spring break. We have a certain number of days. And if we go to this really populated area, we can get 4 visits in. Oh, snap. I can't get this one's full. So that's pretty much always how people end up on them from my experience. And I would say that the overwhelming majority of people are glad that they did it, as opposed to that was a colossal waste of time. But I do have a follow-up question for you on this, and that is, what advice do you have for a student or a counselor or whoever to maximize the self-guided tour?
So I'm going to go answer this in 2 separate segments. The first one is, if you're experiencing I'm scheduling 4 tours on one day, one of them's full, I'm going to do a self-guided option, always reach out to the admission office just to see if you can still chat with an admission officer one-on-one, or is there an extra tour guide that can chat with me? Should I go to different departments on campus? Because you'd be surprised by the availability of some admission officers to be able to take 10 minutes out of their day to chat with you a little bit. But in the event, right, that they are not available, that you're coming after hours, no one's going to be there, students are always walking around campus. And I always tell prospective students, this is your chance, right, to get to know the community and in a really unfiltered and authentic way to just chat with students around campus. And I have frequently heard that amongst folks that have taken self-guided tours at Colorado College, that they tend to be really friendly and nice, which I love to hear, right? Like unsolicited, unpaid, they're just really friendly, which is great. But that gives you that authentic sense of what is it really like to be a student here? And so I think one, right, getting to know the community, asking students along your tour route, even though they're not paid, just asking them questions. And the different departments, if it's in business hours, right? Like admission may be busy, but maybe you have a passion for neuroscience or theater or film. Why not just step into the department, right? Is the admin assistant available? Is there a paraprof that can chat with you? Because even though you're maybe not getting the admission questions you wanted to answer, that's easy, right? You can email the admission office. Maybe you can set up a Zoom call later on to get those questions answered. So maybe you take that opportunity to go into a different department or housing, right? Or answer other questions you're going to have along the way could really tend to maximize a family's experience on campus.
And I know we talked a second ago about how, from your standpoint, engagement is engagement. I mean, sure, your preference would probably be the open house or the in-person.
Sure.
But that distance and time and other things and family resources are oftentimes limiting factors. And you say it is duly noted if you've had any of those types of visits. Does that then necessitate that the family lets the admission office know they're doing this? Because there are people that just pop up on campus and walk around, and there's no knowledge the admission office would ever have that the student is there. Do you think it's important that there's some type of registration or signaling on the school's part, on the student's part?
it's funny, the parents are usually the one that ask this question. And I always tell them it doesn't hurt, right? To
Right.
send an email to your territory rep to just say, hey, I popped by, but there should always be some type of follow-up, right? Like I did the campus tour and I have this question, or I really loved that I saw this and this, right? I think it tends to be mutually beneficial, right? If there is that additional, like, I have a question for you and
Sure.
could you get back to me on this? So we're taking note of like, they did this, self-guided tour and they're critically thinking about this aspect or that aspect. And so that's when I would say definitely reach out to the admission rep, because you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, right? Of like letting us know that you did engage with us, but also that you're thinking about your time on campus and you do have follow-up questions.
And I'm trying to reprogram my mind to move away from using the term demonstrate interest and more toward engagement, because everything you're talking about is
Yeah.
engagement, right? It's
Totally.
it's engagement, and that's what you like to see, because you want to get a sense that they know what they're getting themselves into. Yeah. Great.
Yes,
Great.
absolutely.
Any other advice at all? Anything we haven't talked about self-guided tours that you think people should know? Do they ever fill up, or are they always available?
They're always available. I will say it doesn't hurt, even if it's going to be on a weekend, right? Let's say on a Wednesday afternoon, you're like, I'm going to be in Colorado on Saturday. I know your office isn't open, but I would really love to come to campus. I might email back and say, hey, I left you a special brochure with my contact info and some fun literature about the college. Now you have like a little extra goodie bag that you get to go home with. So even on the front end, if you know you're going to be at a place and if the place is not open or the tour is filled, please just reach out to us, because maybe there's some additional information we can provide you that's just going to heighten your experience when you're on campus.
And the only other thing I'd like to add is that one of the big positives is just the flexibility that they allow for, right? So let's say you were visiting two schools and they are very close to each other. And let's say you had a late morning tour at one, like say it was like a 10:30, and let's say you had something like a 2 at another one. Well, if there was a third one that was, approximate, I mean, you could potentially get a self-guided in there if you were willing to do something at 8:30 or at 4 or 4:30 in a way that's very difficult when you're navigating transportation, parking, logistics, and you also have to fit in with whatever the offerings the school has. And especially in light of what you said, like more and more schools are not offering as many as they once did. So I think that's another huge plus of them, is just the flexibility to say, I have an hour and it's from 4 to 5. I have an hour and it's from 8 to 9. And I don't have to worry about is that the exact time when the school has their programming.
Exactly.
Right? So great. Friends, this concludes part 4 of 5 of my interview with Marissa Salizar, looking at 6 different ways you can visit a college. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. Friends, on Monday's episode, Lisa and I are going to discuss a question, one that came in from Dale, regarding how can I tell if a school is financially sound? Do I have to go to like millions of different resources to get that answer? Or are there any good central resources out there to check out the financial stability of a school? And then Robin from Kansas also came back with a similar question. So we'll tackle those questions, Dale from DC and Robin from Kansas, about the financial health of a school and how you can know about it. And friends, we're picking up our questions from a listener because you guys are picking them up. The more you send in, the more we're going to do these Monday, Thursday. And then we'll continue with Lynda's outstanding interview with Soup Campbell, who's over marketing and brand at Zemi, and understanding how Zemi can help students connect with other students and understand the culture of the college. And before I leave you, I'm very happy to get back to some of my favorite quotes. And I want to reaffirm the quote the listener from Arizona sent in her letter. Just a little background about this quote. It's attributed to Tim Noetke, who's a high school basketball coach in the Midwest. But Kevin Durant, the famous basketball player, is sort of considered the person who made the quote famous. And you'll hear 2 versions of it. Some people say hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And some people say hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. Either way, it's the same point. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.